All right, let's dive right into this explainer. We usually picture science happening in these sterile, super high-tech modern labs, right? But based on Dr. Abdul Azim Anis's incredible book, Science and Civilization, we're going to see how the real foundations of human knowledge were actually forged way back in the mud of ancient river valleys in Egypt and Babylon. And it wasn't out of simple curiosity, no. It was born out of absolute life-or-death necessity.
I mean, think about it. Before we had modern apps or digital calendars or, hospitals, our ancestors faced some seriously monumental struggles. How do you feed a massive growing population? What do you do when the river that waters literally all your crops just unpredictably floods? Or how do you treat the terrible injuries people got while building the ancient world's greatest monuments? It was actually these incredibly practical, immediate problems that forced abstract ideas to become life-saving solutions.
So, here's our roadmap for today's explainer. 1. Necessity is the mother of invention. 2. Reading the stars. 3. Solar and lunar calendars. 4. Medicine between magic and science. And finally, 5. The first surgical document. Let's start with Section 1. Necessity is the mother of invention.
So as we see here, science definitely didn't emerge in a vacuum. It really came from the dirt, the water, and the brutal daily grind of survival. Organizing agriculture around violent, totally unpredictable river floods was literally a matter of life and death. And as these societies grew, they needed this enormous surplus of food to support the kings, the nobles, and the massive labor forces building these giant monuments. To manage all of that, society required unprecedented organization. You couldn't just guess when to plant crops anymore. The sheer scale of civilization demanded exact measurements, advanced planning, and just a really deep understanding of nature's cycles. Moving on to Section 2, reading the stars. To conquer the absolute chaos of nature, early humans had to look up. They had to turn the sky into a giant clock. You see, the Earth itself just didn't give them enough warning for the changing of the seasons, so the priests and scholars cast their eyes upwards. And based on our source material, Science and Civilization, the Egyptians made a totally brilliant observation to predict the crucial Nile flood. Because remember, the entire Egyptian economy, their very existence, depended entirely on the Nile. If it flooded too early or too late or didn't flood enough, famine. Famine would sweep the land. So the stakes, they literally could not have been higher.
Well, they noticed something amazing. A specific star, the star Sirius, which is known as Al-Shira in Arabic, appeared on the horizon exactly at sunrise, right before that life-giving Nile flood began. This event, the heliacal rising of Sirius, became their ultimate cosmic signal. The priests basically realized that the sky wasn't just a canvas for myths, right? It was a predictable, readable map. By meticulously tracking Sirius, they could warn the farmers, organize the planting seasons, and literally ensure the survival of their entire civilization. So this wasn't just casual stargazing. This was the actual birth of astronomy out of sheer agricultural necessity.
Which brings us to Section 3, Solar and Lunar Calendars.
So this single astronomical observation led to some massive innovations in timekeeping, and it varied super dramatically depending on where you lived, because once you realize the stars repeat their patterns, you can build a whole system around it. The contrast between two of the great ancient powers is actually pretty stark. Egypt established a solar calendar tied to the sun and the star Sirius. They created a 365-day year, divided into 12 months of 30 days, plus 5 complementary days right at the end. That is remarkably close to our modern calendar. Meanwhile, over in Babylon, they relied on a 354-day lunar calendar. But here's the catch. Because a lunar year falls out of sync with the solar seasons incredibly fast, Babylon needed a totally different approach to fix it. King Hammurabi and the other rulers had to rely on reports from officials tracking the new moon, and they would literally issue royal decrees to arbitrarily just shove a 13th month into the calendar just to keep their farming seasons aligned. Crazy, right?
But, even the Egyptian system wasn't perfect. Because their 365-day calendar missed a quarter day each year, which is what we fix with leap years today, the calendar slowly drifted out of sync with the actual seasons. Imagine celebrating midsummer festivals in the dead of winter. Over generations, the seasons shifted entirely. And that led to this incredibly relatable, honestly slightly hilarious complaint from an ancient 19th dynasty student who was literally begging the gods to save him from a year where winter had completely swapped places with summer. And here's a wild number for you. It took exactly 1,460 years. That span is known as the Sothic cycle, or the Great Year. That's how long it took for their unadjusted calendar to naturally sync back up with the actual astronomical seasons. 1,460 years. Just think about the dedication of those Egyptian record keepers. They tracked this tiny discrepancy over thousands of years, passing data down through generations and generations of scribes. It really proves just an incredible commitment to long-term observation.
All right, let's shift gears to Section 4, Medicine Between Magic and Science. Now we're pivoting from solving the mysteries of the sky clock straight into the mysteries of the human body. Let's look at how ancient magic was actually the true predecessor to science. See, in the ancient mind, an illness wasn't caused by germs. It was caused by an evil spirit moving in and taking up residence inside a person's body. So how do you cure the patient? Simple. You have to make the body a totally uninhabitable place for that spirit. And this logic led to the use of incredibly foul-tasting, repulsive potions. Now, sure, it sounds like pure magic to us today, but for them, it was a perfectly logical methodology based on their understanding of the world. They were using cause and effect. They just had the wrong initial cause.
And that leads us to our final part, Section 5, the first surgical document. So, the treatment of physical trauma, like from construction accidents and war, that forced a massive separation between magical rituals and observable science. Think about it. When a worker on a pyramid suffers a compound fracture or a soldier gets struck in the head with a mace, you can clearly see the cause of the ailment. It's not some hidden, sneaky spirit. It's a giant rock or a weapon. And this brings us to a really revolutionary breakthrough from ancient Egypt, the Edwin Smith Papyrus. Dating back to somewhere between 2000 and 1500 BC, though it's possibly copying text from as early as 2500 BC, this papyrus is widely considered the world's very first true scientific surgical document. It is a stunning departure from potions and spells. This text focuses almost entirely on observable physical realities. The papyrus lays out a strict, incredibly pioneering scientific method that is completely free of magic. It's an objective approach to healthcare that, honestly, we still use today. First, the physician conducts a physical examination. Second, they provide a diagnosis, and they explicitly classify whether the condition is treatable or untreatable. And third, they prescribe a direct physical treatment. There are zero incantations here. This is pure empirical observation in action. This document meticulously detailed exactly 48 distinct medical cases. It started from the head and moved downwards, and it included incredibly complex injuries like skull fractures and severe brain trauma. But what is truly amazing here is their intellectual humility. By categorizing certain injuries as an ailment not to be treated, they proved that they completely understood the absolute limits of their capabilities. They weren't out there promising magical cures, right? They were treating medicine as a strict, rigorous science, carefully documenting their failures and their successes so they could pass that knowledge down to the next generation of surgeons. So as you think about how absolute necessity birthed the incredible fields of astronomy and medicine right out of ancient magic and survival, ask yourself this: what current beliefs or practices in our modern world might actually be the stepping stones for tomorrow's great scientific leaps? What are we doing today that future generations will look back on as the humble, rudimentary beginnings of an entirely new understanding of the universe? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep questioning the world around you.